So therefore you wouldn't be able to do either of these things. You can't learn to read either, probably, from reading a book if you can't access the information. The third and fourth pillar of education are the reasons why I organised this conference. To promote awareness, to acknowledge that everybody is different and everybody learns in a different way, everybody thinks in a different way. If you look around the room, everybody looks different, so why would we suppose that what goes on inside our brains is the same and that we all enjoy the same things? And lastly, to reframe education from a one-dimensional approach into a whole holistic approach so that it suits everybody. And as somebody asked Martin, what would his ideal school be? The only way we can know that is by talking to a huge amount of the population, and they can input what they think will be best. So my story started, or as I thought, when my son was 5 and he was not doing well in school. I mean, the difference from his first few days in education and my eldest daughter's was phenomenal. So after a few days I knew that he was not flourishing the way she had. And prior to that we thought he was a genius. He made 2 jigsaws that were 2,000 pieces when he was 2. He's got off to school and he'll be top of the class. After a few weeks he was sitting there quietly. He would only go into school if you brought him to his desk, but he didn't complain, he just wasn't happy. Then I thought back to my childhood, and I remembered being at a funeral, and I met someone who was my second cousin. I heard lots of people whispering in the corner about her. Now, I'd had a long conversation with her. She was bright and intelligent. I was very shy and quiet at the time. And I heard them mention the word dyslexia. And at the time, I didn't think anything of it. I didn't know anything about dyslexia. I knew there was members of my family who were not doing well in school at the time. They were just considered like the stupid ones. It seemed to be a common thing among everybody in all my social circle. In every family there was one child who was not doing well in education and the rest were doing fine, but it was accepted that, okay, that's the weak person. So I heard the word dyslexia, and then I heard them say, well, she works in a bakery, but what would you expect, because she's dyslexic? And I remember thinking, that is very strange, because I just spoke to this girl. She didn't seem any different than anyone else. But obviously, I thought, well, there must be something I don't know. So then, when my son was not doing well, I did a lot of research, and I came to the conclusion that he was dyslexic. Then I read a book called The Gift of Dyslexia, which started me on the journey to where I am today. And on the very first page of the book, it describes, Ron Davis, it describes what being dyslexic is like, and I thought, wow, that's it, that's the answer, that is what my son is. He's just a dyslexic learner. I thought this revelation would be, accepted by the schools. Went into the school, they weren't really interested, so I changed to a private school. And he did much better in the private school, I have to say. But after 1 year in the private school, the teacher came to me and said, wow, like he's amazing, he's got an A in maths. Well, first I thought it was very odd that a 5-year-old was doing a summer maths test, but that's another story. And he was getting A's and everything, but apart from the reading. And she wanted to keep him back, and I said, no, we won't be keeping him back. I have sisters who were kept back in school. It impacted their self-esteem enormously. There wasn't any value to it, they didn't improve. And so I knew that was not the solution, staying back. He was not going to be the best reader the next year either, and he would be a year older than all his classmates. And the result of one of my sisters staying back twice actually was that she has very low self-esteem, and the level of bullying she endured was like astronomical. Then I found the wonderful Sister Antoinette, who is sitting here today, and she is one of the reasons that I got into Davis. She, at the time, was the only person in the country doing this method, and because she was well respected within the education system, I knew that if she was doing it, that there was something different about Davis, and that it was something that I could invest my time, my energy, I suppose, and my money into. So then I went off to train. And what is the Davis difference? Well, the Davis method was written by a gentleman called Ronald T. Davis, who is autistic and dyslexic. His life work really was to help autistic people, and on the way he discovered that he could help dyslexics as well. Now, I'm not going to go into Ron's whole story, but you can find out plenty of information online, or if you read The Gift of Dyslexia or The Gift of Learning, that will give you an insight into what Ron talks about. But the program that I teach is based on what Ron has written in his books. Now, the difference with Davis, I think, is two words: perception and disorientation. So most other methods for dyslexia, ADD, ADHD, because even though I am a Davis dyslexia facilitator, not all of my students are dyslexic. Some are dyspraxic, some are dyscalculic, some are ADD, some are ADHD, some are autistic. So it's a broad spectrum, and there is a program to suit everybody, because everybody doesn't sit in a box. So I don't have a student who's dyslexic, and another student who's autistic, and another student who's dyspraxic. Everybody is different. Some people might struggle with reading, some might struggle with reading and maths. Others might just have coordination issues or social skills. So I suppose what I'm trying to say is, if you look around the room, there'll be people with multiple skills in multiple different areas. Perception, perspective, disorientation. So, when I was in school, I was a good student. I could keep up with the class easily. I got very bored, very, very bored. So the teacher would do a maths question, and I know that I'd have it right straight away. So then what would I do? I'd look out the window. I'd start daydreaming. Then I'd go to do the maths test, and I would expect to get an A, but I wouldn't get an A, I'd get a C or a D. Why? Because I had switched off. I had disorientated. The content was too boring. It was going at too slow a pace for me. So anyone who knows me, my kids say you're very ADHD. I just thought my husband was very lazy when I married him. I think still think that. So in my case, I enjoyed education. I didn't struggle with the words. I just struggled with paying attention. I loved primary school because I went to school with lots of windows, lots of green space around it. Then I went to secondary school. I hated first year. I was in a classroom with 4 cement walls, not a window in sight. So there was nothing to distract my attention. And for very many people, the lack of colour in their surroundings, the lack of anything interesting to look at, is a big problem. For others, that's a calming effect. Now, what happens to the dyslexic student when they're sitting in the classroom, or the ADHD student, or the autistic student? Sometimes they cause a lot of havoc, just to distract from their difficulties. Sometimes they're really quiet because so they can fly under the radar. Sometimes they don't want to go to school. So very many of my dyslexic students will go to school once, twice a week maybe. Or if they go, they might have to go home after 2 hours because of a headache, or they feel sick. And then others work really, really, really hard, and they're not rewarded by their efforts. So eventually that builds up anxiety, stress, depression, and the long-term effects of that on the psychology of someone is detrimental. Okay, so I want you to read this sentence. I'm going to give you about 30 seconds. And then later on I'm going to ask you if you can tell me what the sentence is. Okay, so what is disorientation? And why do children and adults do it? So I talked a little bit about it a few minutes ago when I talked about my daydreaming and my looking out the window to keep myself occupied. So I was disorientating when I was doing that. So when I was doing that, I wasn't listening to what the teacher was saying. I had no recollection of what the class was about. What I remembered was what I saw out of the window. And this is a natural solution that a lot of people choose to use when they're very stressed, very confused. So dyslexic people tend to generally have a much lower threshold of confusion. So they might be reading a passage, first couple of sentences they can tolerate. After another few sentences, the confusion when they don't understand the words become too much, and so their natural instinct is to disorientate. Now that disorientation works in some instances, and it can be a good skill if you want to figure out something that's a 3D scenario. So my son was an extremely placid child. He slept from the time he was 11 days old. And it was only when I did my Davis training did I realise that he had a way of reassuring himself. So he only had to see me, even from the distance, and he could figure out who it was that was there, compared to my two daughters who were a nightmare and didn't sleep at all. So if you're looking at a piece of paper with a word on it, say any word at all, like what, you go, what does that mean? So if you're dyslexic, you might say, ooh, when I was younger, I know that if I disorientated and looked at it from a different angle, that helped solve the problem. That doesn't work when it's a word, because all you end up is multiple images. So you might hear people talking about numbers flipping around on a page or spinning, and that's just the person's natural ability and their way of looking at it from different angles. It's not a good solution, and it's what causes the anxiety, the stress, and the frustration. So the key today is to give students, children, teenagers, adults, strategies so that they can work well in a school environment, a work environment, anywhere where they have to read, listen, think. If you're running around outside doing sport, art, and have to worry about it. So we're adding skills, we're not trying to change people. So I have a few lovely assistants of mine who are going to give you some clay for an exercise. So these are three of my students from the local school. And I'm going to give you a word, and I want you to try and use the clay to make a picture that matches the word. So I'm not going to tell you what the word means. Now the clay is a little bit hard this morning, I apologise for that. Okay, so 2 or 3 people can make a picture. The rest of you, I want you to get to walk around the room, make loads of noise, have a conversation. Just be quiet, so the louder you are, the better. There's plenty of teenagers here, I'm sure you're great at making noise. Okay, so the word I want you to make a picture for is the word how.
A picture with the clay.
A picture with the clay, yeah.
You make one picture for the table.
Yeah, one picture for the table is fine.
We make on this one.
It's just if you want to roll it, that's the only reason I gave the map. I don't want to destroy all the tablecloths belonging to the hotel. Mark's going to look after the time, so he's going to give you 5 minutes. The noisier you are, the better.
There's the
Mark, can you remind them every minute that they're going to go? Okay, hurry up now, hurry up. Don't have a lot of time. 4 minutes left. Don't fall, guys. Girls, any more to say? Well, you can give them some anyway, see. You can give them a job.
Build them up. I make all get
Right, we're done.
One more minute, guys. Okay, about another 30 seconds, guys. Come on, hurry up. How are we doing on time, Mark? Okay, last minute, guys. I know it said 30 seconds a minute ago, but my ADHD, my internal clock goes very fast sometimes. Okay, everybody. How did everyone get on?
We won.
You won, did you?
We won.
You won. What did you make?
Yeah, no question mark.
You made the question mark.
And the man goes like that.
You made the question mark and a man standing like that. Very good. Yes, actually. What did you make? Question mark. Anybody else make anything? Martin, what did you make?
I made a maze and an arrow and something to go through the maze.
Excellent. Anybody else, girls, did you make something? You're still working on it. Did anybody find it hard to think of a picture to make? No, you didn't. Anybody else? Nori.
I want to go to question mark and and what is this?
Okay, very good. Does anybody know what the word how means?
Yeah.
What's it mean? It means how. Anybody got anything to expand on the meaning of how other than how? In what way? Well done. You can tell she's a teacher. Very good. So that is right. It means in what way? Now, the reason that I got you to make that was that in the work that I do, we use play like this to resolve confusion with words. So not all words are confusing to everybody. The words that confuse most dyslexic people are what we call the trigger words. Schools call the dolphin list, or tricky words now. So they're words without pictures. So if I asked you to imagine a cat, can you imagine a cat? Can you imagine a pink cat? Can you imagine a pink cat sitting in a tree?
Yeah.
Very good. Can you imagine a picture for there?
Yeah.
You can. What can you think about for the word there?
An arrow.
An arrow. Anyone else? Anybody not have a picture for the word there? So if I ask you to think, does anybody think of just the word and not a picture? Yeah. Does anybody here, how many people here are dyslexic? Very good. And girls, do you find words confusing? Yeah. Okay. So in the method that I teach, we use the clay like this to resolve confusions. So we find out what is the meaning of the word, and using the meaning of the word, we make a picture to create the word. The reason for that is, if you're dyslexic, you like thinking in pictures much better than thinking in words. So for a dyslexic, they see a word, they go to their brain, see, in my filing cabinet, do I have a picture to go with that? If I don't, your brain stops searching. If you're a word thinker, you see the word, you flick through your filing cabinet and go, yeah, I know that word, and then you make a picture. Because dyslexics' brains go in the opposite direction, they need the picture. All these words don't naturally have pictures to go with them, and this is why we create pictures. We're creating a picture for a blank space. Because if you're reading a piece of information which has a lot of trigger words in it, it's very hard to get an accurate picture of what is being described. Okay, so how do we resolve confusions? So I've just demonstrated to you one of the ways that we resolve the confusion, and that is we call it symbol mastery, because words are really just symbols. The symbols represent an idea, an object, a thought, and not all of them are obvious, and hence we use clay to resolve those. The first thing that we start off with before we ever get to symbol mastery is teaching the student how to focus. So that might sound like an obvious thing, and sometimes when I speak to people, I say, well, you need to teach the student how to focus first, otherwise they cannot access the information. Oh yeah, I tell them to focus, or I tell them to concentrate. It's not a telling exercise, it's a doing exercise, and we have two ways of teaching students to focus. One is an orientation tool, and the other one is alignment, which is getting all your senses in a line. The reason for that sometimes the information you take in with your eyes is not accurate. Sometimes it's the information that you hear isn't accurate. So for dyslexics or ADD, ADHD, or any neurodiverse people, it can be the sounds around them that cause the confusion. It can be what they're reading that causes the confusion. It can be a feeling. It can be, like in this case when I gave you the clay, if you didn't like clay, that might cause confusion or make you uncomfortable. So the first step is to teach the student to focus. Now once they've learned to focus, then some people like me have very high energy dials, other people have very low energy dials. If your dial is always too high, then you're always wanting to be busy. And by the time you get home, you're absolutely exhausted. So you might be swinging on your chair in school. I remember when my son was in school, all the teachers said he paid attention very well in secondary school, apart from the geography teacher who complained that he swung on the chair the whole time. And I asked Christian about this. Christian does that at home as well. And he said it's because the geography teacher starts telling stories and he gets totally distracted. And he'll tell a story for about 20 minutes before he gets to what he's actually trying to teach them. So knowing how much energy to use for a specific task is a critical life skill. If you want to run a marathon, you don't want to be going like this, do you? Likewise, if you're sitting in the classroom, you don't want to have loads of energy because there's nowhere for the energy to go if you're required to sit on a seat. The next one is a very, very important skill, and it's called release, which is a relaxation technique. It's very similar to what, if you've ever gone to a yoga class, because breathing is so important. Your brain works on oxygen. You need oxygen for your blood to circulate around your body. So breathing properly is essential if you want to control stress. A lot of people who are not happy in school, they suffer from a lot of stress, a lot of anxiety. Their breathing is very shallow, their jaw flies up and down. So all of those things together create a uncomfortable space for the student. And so these are the things that we address in the day of the programme. Now, when we are when we've made our play word, we've made the picture, we make the word in play. The reason for that is to understand a word properly, you have to know what it looks like, what it sounds like, what it means. So, if it's a word like there and you haven't got a picture, you've created the picture so you know what it looks like. You know what it sounds like if you say it out loud, and you know what it means because you found that meaning in the dictionary. To fully understand words, all these three things have to be present. And now we move on to maths, and I've written maths, what's the problem? And at the moment, it's an astronomical problem in this country. And I think in the UK, America, Europe, particularly since COVID, because I have some students who are now in first year. The level of maths they're at is 4th class in primary school. They've missed 2 years of school, so if they were struggling already, they're struggling twice as much now, because first year teachers are not going to start at 4th class level in maths. They're going to start on the first year curriculum. So I have one student who's trying to do algebra. The student couldn't even figure out how to divide a pizza between 6 people because it was called fractions. And in her head, fractions are something very complicated that she didn't know how to do because someone told her a long time ago she couldn't do fractions. Then there's a lot of people who think that maths aren't important. I was speaking to someone the other day and he said to me, there's only 2 common languages in the world, love and maths, and he's only concerned about maths. And I thought about it for a while and he's right. So every country in the world uses the same type of maths. So being bad at maths should not be acceptable. There's ways of teaching children maths when you use a sequential approach, but it's building blocks. So the students I was talking about, they've got some of the blocks, they're missing the blocks, they're missing the cement, so the building falls down. The students that I've seen in this year's first year, there's no way that they're going to get to junior cert and leaving cert level when they're that far behind. So where they need to start is from the beginning with a sequential approach. So some of them come to me looking for tutoring. It's not something I like doing. I don't like tutoring a student who's that far behind because you're starting at a point that they're not at. So I can teach them the algebra, I can teach them the trigonometry. They don't understand the logic, it doesn't make sense. They'll remember it while I'm sitting beside them. Next week they come back, they don't know it again. It requires me to be there constantly. So I would much rather start from the point where the student is at, not where the school thinks they should be. So I thought, you're probably all sick of me by now anyway, that I would tell you a few stories about some of my students. So one student who came to me about 2 years ago, he had a diagnosis of dyscalculia or dyscalculia, which meant that he was not good at maths. He found the symbols in maths confusing. He didn't understand the maths words because that is another confusing thing. So the same word might mean something different in maths than it does in English. Anyway, we started the program. Well, we didn't. The first day, every time I asked him to do something, he said no. So I said, would you like a cup of tea? He said, yeah. We had a cup of tea, we had biscuits. All the students loved coming to my house because they always have tea and biscuits. Then I said, we'll go out in the garden. And then I started to chat because you have to build a relationship with a child, especially one who's going to say no. Because it's fear that's making them say no. They haven't been successful before. So they're concerned that whatever I'm going to do is going to make them feel a failure again. Anyway, he was big into Super Mario, and then I took some clay out and I said, do you like colours? We got coloured clay out and we made a Super Mario figure. And he was delighted with himself. Now, that gave me an opportunity to see how he functioned physically with his hands. And what I noticed straight away that he was also dyspraxic. So I had to help him make the figure, but he was delighted with the figure. So then I said, okay, so I'll tell you what, we'll do a deal. We'll make a clay figure, then we'll do 15 minutes of my work. So he said, fine. So we had a negotiation going on. Then we did the maths program. Near the end of the week, he said, oh, as well as maths, I have another goal, Larry. I want you to teach me how to dive into a swimming pool. I was going, okay, great. I was going, okay, stand up, can you jump? And he goes, jump. And I went, yeah, jump. And he's going, so I demonstrated how you jump. So I thought, a bit higher. And I asked him, could he do it? He had no idea how to jump. He didn't know what the word jump meant. So I said, okay. Now this child was 10, 11. We went outside and I asked him, did you want to jump on the trampoline? He got on the trampoline, just stood there. So then I said, okay, you hop down and I got up on the trampoline and I demonstrated how you jump on a trampoline. He got back up and he could move his body, but his feet were still not leaving the trampoline. Eventually, after about 3 days of doing this, he could jump on the trampoline. 3 months later, he could dive into a swimming pool. He joined a running club. Prior to that, that child spent his whole days inside playing computer games. So his life was very limited. He wasn't engaging with people, because I think to really flourish, you have to eat healthy, you have to engage in other people, you have to do sport. It's a whole person-centered approach. It requires multiple things. Now, one last thing about that student, I asked him to make a clay model of himself. So this is part of most of our programs where we get students to make clay models of themselves. It's the very first concept. If you don't have a good idea of yourself, it's very hard to learn anything, do anything. He made the clay model and I was helping him by rolling some clay strips, and he put some hair at the front, and I said, would you like me to help you roll some more strips to make some hair for the back of your model? And he goes, oh, do I have hair on the back of my head? And he put his hand up to his head and he goes, oh, I do. And I said to him, do you brush your own hair? Yeah. I mean, to me it was fascinating the way different people's brains work. I couldn't understand how a child of 10, nearly 11, wouldn't realise there was hair on his head, the back of his head, when he had clearly been brushing his own hair for a long time. He wasn't embarrassed by the fact that he didn't know. He just thought it was, oh, yeah, I do. He was like delighted with himself. So, one of my very first students who came to me was a university student. She was 28. She had gone back to education. She was dyslexic. And she wrote a testimonial for me some time ago. And in it she wrote just one sentence. I walked in on a Monday not reading. I walked out on a Friday reading. So she'd gone to school. She could read. She didn't retain any of the information she read. She said, that's not reading. She knew that wasn't reading. That wasn't working for college. So she came and did a program with me. 2 years ago, she rang me to say she had a 5-year-old son and that her son wasn't doing well in school. She used to drive the son up from Wexford on a Friday morning. He worked with me for 2 hours and then he went home. So it was a 3 or 4 hour round trip for them because she'd stop on the way. Because that's how invested she felt in the program and in the approach that we use. I think the thing about Davis is most of the people involved in the work are parents of children who are either dyslexic, dyspraxic, autistic, somewhere on the neurodiverse spectrum. They understand what it feels like. They understand the stress that parents go through. They understand how the children are feeling. My husband was dyslexic, is dyslexic, I should say, very dyslexic. And he had a terrible time in school. And when I suggested my son was dyslexic, he had an absolute fit because he didn't know he was dyslexic till he went to do a master's degree in Trinity. And they suggested to him that maybe they should test him. They did, and they said he was dyslexic. He hid the results in his drawer, and I found them. And he said, no, Christian is not dyslexic. I think he thought by just saying it would make it so. Because Christian was only 5 at the time, and I said, he definitely is. He just didn't want him to be dyslexic because of his bad experiences, but you can't make people be what they're not. Okay, so who remembers the sentence that I gave you earlier? Anybody remember the sentence? Anybody remember anything about the sentence?
Tiny blue bird.
What did you say?
Tiny blue bird. Flutter through the flowers.
Oh, well done. This boy remembers it. Now, so my colleague at the back there, Tessa, told me this sentence yesterday in the car. And the interesting thing about this sentence is there's no butterfly in it. But when she said it to me, I said, oh, the only thing I remember is a butterfly fluttering. I then went to do the presentation last night and I just clicked on the PowerPoint where it gives you ideas. And when I typed the sentence in, it picked a picture of butterflies. So, well done to this boy over here. What's your name?
Scott.
So Scott has a great memory. Mine, I don't remember the whole sentence, I have to admit. I just knew he was right though. Okay. So I want to just end by saying that thank you to everybody who came today. We really appreciate you coming. Thanks to the students who gave up their school morning, which I'm sure they dread. And it's also a day when they finish early from school. We wish more people had come, but what we're trying to do is spread the word that there is help out there. So everybody who's here, if you could share, if you tell other people what we've spoken about, there is supports out there, and at the end of the day, we're going to be giving a scholarship to one student. So that will be services from myself and many of the other speakers and the exhibitors who are here today. So whatever support the student needs, they will get. If there are any students outside of that one student that is selected that needs support, obviously, my cards are at the back, so you can just contact me and I can put you in touch with whatever supports you need. So thanks again for listening to me. I hope I didn't bore you to tears. I'm not quite as entertaining as Martin, unfortunately. My kids tell me I'm not entertaining at all, actually. And I want to end by saying it takes courage to grow up and become who you really are. So be courageous. Thank you.
Sorry, do you have any questions from Marie? We have
Thanks, Anne-Marie. That was very interesting. Does the Davis programme run alongside mainstream education? And is it a concise programme or is it an ongoing?
So the Davis programme, it doesn't run side a lot education. It doesn't use phonics, which is the main way that children are taught to read in school. It's more of a creative method. It is a complete programme. It's a 30-hour intensive programme. So whether the maths programme is slightly longer, but for a standard dyslexia programme is 30 hours intensive work. And then there is follow-up work that needs to be done. So some of my students who are here today, they come back to me each week. And so I teach some of my students, once they've done a one-to-one program with me, they come back and we work in groups. And so we have different themes. So last year we did financial literacy through gardening. So the students grew vegetables in the garden and we learned about sales and profit and loss. Then we did a session on time. I suppose it's a much more holistic approach. It's a much more hands-on approach. There is a lot of students, and some of my students, their parents are teachers who bring their students to me. most of my students would be still in school. But the only thing that I would say that is if they're doing a day's program and they're going into school and the teacher is saying that they have to do phonics, the two things will clash. So what I usually advise is, I don't advise people to take their kids out of school. It's up to each parent to decide if that's for them. My youngest child left school when she was 12, but not for the reasons that we're talking about here today. And I have a lot of students who are homeschooled, but to me, yes, if the school is open and the school is willing to take the child out of the extra resource where they might be doing phonics or the resource teachers, because it does vary from school to school. So some schools are very open-minded and they will let you come in and they will do the reading steps that we do in our days program. Some schools won't. So you really have to, what I would say is though it's your child and your decision. So I was one of those annoying parents. My kids were all in different schools, 3 different schools. I drove around in a circle because each of them was different and required different things. But I always knew I was right. I know it sounds very big-headed, but I think parents do know their children. So if someone's saying to you, no, they're just lazy, no, they just need to concentrate. I remember one resource teacher told me that my son would have to do the applied leaving cert. Now, she had decided this when my son was 6. How she came to this conclusion, I have no idea. My son did leaving cert physics and got an A, so he didn't need to do the applied. He hated college, and he didn't stay in college, and he's done a lot of different things since. It's not about doing amazing in the leaving cert. It's about creating people who can live and successfully thrive in society, people who know how to look after themselves physically and mentally. So I would say that, and Davis does give them those skills.
Thank you.
Sorry, that was a very long answer.
Sorry, can I just add to what Anne-Marie said?
Sure, this is my colleague Tessa.
And just say and remind you that Davis Learning Strategies is very much a programme that was developed by Ron Davis to put into schools. Sadly, there are not many schools that actually incorporate Davis Learning Strategies within Europe, but very successful, massive success in a school in Chennai in India, in Canada, and in certain schools of the States, where children that have done this method of learning, this very visual, hands-on, creative way of learning, the number of referrals to special ed have plummeted, the number of referrals to gifted massively increased. So this whole way of learning, this shift in mentality from what Martin was saying earlier, being very rigid, to having a much more flexible and creative approach to really understanding what learning is about, can work, can make a tremendous difference. So that's Davis Learning Strategies.
Thanks, Tessa. Before I go, I just want to thank my 3 lovely assistants here. So, they're very sad that they have to have some time off school today.
We're very happy, by the way.
Thank you so much. Anybody got any? Yes.
Is the Davis program just for children with dyslexia, or is it for all types of neurodiversity?
It's for all types of neurodiverse. And I mean, some students that I've worked with don't have any labels. I'm not a huge fan of labels. They don't need to have had an assessment. One child that I worked with on a maths program, he just had a lot of upheaval and disruption in his family life, and he had to move home and move to a different school. And he ended up he was at the top of the class in one school. When he moved to Portmarnock, he plummeted down. So I did a maths program with him, and he went back up to the top of the class. But in his case, it was more from his social situation, and like Martin's talking about the environment. So he was in a different environment, it didn't suit him, he was missing his friends, so he was just dragging himself through school and had missed a lot of content. And so yeah. So it's the courses cover a broad spectrum of abilities, yeah.
Is it available through through a public system, or is it just privately?
Only privately at the moment, yeah. I mean, we have tried to get funding, but, you know, one of the reasons that I wanted to organise this conference is that if you go to a psychologist or you go to a doctor or you go to an educational place, they don't pass on the information of all the people that are out there and that are working on the ground helping students. At the moment, like it's one-to-one, but like Tessa said, I mean, our desire and our goal would be to get Davis learning strategies into school. It's not that complicated, it's quite simple. And it doesn't cost a lot to train the teachers. And if it was done in junior infants, it works for everybody. So it's not like, okay, the kids who prefer words are not going to be successful, they are. It works for everybody. Because small children, I mean, it works even on their tactile skills, their motor skills, their balance and coordination skills. Like there's huge benefits to it.
Anne-Marie,
Yes.
what's the age profile of the people you work with?
So the age profile of the people I work with is 4 to 81. My oldest student was an 81-year-old lady who did a maths program with me because she was panicking because she couldn't understand the cashless society. So her bank used to do everything for her. She'd bring the money in, they'd pay all her bills. But now there's nobody in the banks, and so yeah, she rang me like very stressed to say there is no help for older people. And I said, well, there is, because people tend to think, I suppose, of dyslexia as a child or a teenage problem, but not. It's a huge problem among adults. At least now people are talking about it. When in my husband's day and my sister's day, it was just you weren't very clever. In fact, you're quite stupid, yeah. And I suppose that the more people tell you that, the more you believe it. Thank you. Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks very much, Anne-Marie. We're going to have Louise Plunkett regarding visual impairments. We'll talk about teaching businesses how to enhance accessibility of the digital and social content. And then we're going to go straight into the panel discussion then with Shane, Rob, Joanna, and Marie. You want to get someone?